Think about the last time you felt truly anxious. Not sad, not in pain, anxious. Chances are, it wasn't because something bad had definitely happened. It was because you didn't know what was going to happen. A message left unread, a test result you're waiting for, a job interview with no follow-up call. Your mind doesn't relax in that space. It spirals. And the real answer to why is far stranger than humans fear death. Because death, as terrifying as it sounds, is final. It has an edge. It ends. What your ancestors actually feared most wasn't death itself. It was something far more corrosive. Something that could keep a threat alive in your mind indefinitely. They feared not knowing. And that fear is still running the show inside you today, in ways you've probably never noticed. Picture a small group of early humans camped at the edge of a forest 60,000 years ago. A predator was spotted nearby yesterday. Today, there's no sign of it. No tracks, no sound, no warning. You might think the absence of a threat would bring relief. It doesn't. Not knowing where the predator is, whether it's circling back, whether it's watching right now from the tree line, produces a kind of dread that a confirmed sighting never could. Certainty, even bad certainty, gives your brain something to work with. Uncertainty gives it nothing but an open loop it can't close. Neuroscientist and primatologist Robert Sapolsky spent decades studying stress in wild baboons, and what he found reshaped how scientists understand fear itself. Sapolsky discovered that unpredictable stress does far more damage to an animal's body and mind than predictable stress of the same intensity, or even greater intensity. A baboon that knows exactly when it will be attacked by a dominant male can prepare, brace, recover. A baboon that never knows when the next attack is coming lives in a near-constant state of physiological alarm. Its stress hormones stay elevated. Its immune system suffers. Its whole nervous system behaves as though the threat is always present. Because, as far as its brain can tell, it is. Does that sound familiar? It should. Because you don't need a predator in the grass to feel it. You need an unanswered text message. An ambiguous tone in your boss's email. A doctor's appointment where the results haven't come back yet. Your body reacts to the not knowing almost exactly the way that baboon's body reacts to an unpredictable attack. The threat doesn't have to be real. It only has to be uncertain. Here's where the reframe gets deeper. Your ancestors didn't just fear specific dangers like predators, starvation, or rival groups. They feared the absence of a pattern. Humans are, at their core, prediction machines. Neuroscientist Karl Friston has spent much of his career developing what's now called the predictive processing framework. The idea that your brain isn't just reacting to the world moment by moment. It's constantly generating predictions about what should happen next, and comparing those predictions against what actually happens. When reality matches the prediction, your brain stays calm. When it doesn't, when something breaks the expected pattern, your brain treats that mismatch as a kind of alarm, regardless of whether the mismatch is dangerous or not. Think about what that means for early survival. A group of hunter-gatherers who could accurately predict where food would be, when predators would hunt, how the seasons would shift, had an enormous advantage over a group that couldn't. Prediction wasn't a luxury, it was survival currency. And every time a pattern broke unexpectedly, every time the expected rustle of prey turned into unexplained silence, every time a group member vanished without explanation, the brain treated that break in prediction as more dangerous than almost anything else. Because an unpredictable world was a world you couldn't prepare for. This is why ancient humans, across cultures with no contact with one another, independently developed an obsession with explanation. Every early human society you can name built elaborate stories to explain thunder, disease, death, and the movement of stars. Not because they were naive, because an unexplained event was psychologically unbearable in a way a frightening but explained event was not. A storm caused by an angry god was terrifying, but it was predictable. You could appease the god. You could perform the ritual. You could restore the pattern. A storm that came from nowhere, for no reason, obeying no rules at all, was far more threatening to the ancient mind, because it meant the world itself might be fundamentally unknowable. Anthropologist Bronisław Malinowski, studying the Trobriand Islanders in the early 20th century, made an observation that still holds up remarkably well. He noticed that these communities relied heavily on ritual and magic, specifically in situations involving high uncertainty and low control, like deep-sea fishing in dangerous waters, but relied far less on ritual for activities with predictable, controllable outcomes, like fishing in a calm lagoon close to shore. The magic wasn't really about controlling the fish. It was about controlling the unbearable feeling of not knowing what the ocean would do. Ritual gave the mind a pattern to hold on to, even when the actual outcome remained entirely outside anyone's control. This reveals something remarkable about what your ancestors were really protecting themselves from. Not just physical danger, but the psychological unbearability of an open question. An unanswered threat is worse than a confirmed one, because a confirmed threat can be planned around. An unanswered one keeps your entire system on alert indefinitely, burning resources, disrupting sleep, hijacking attention, all in service of trying to close a loop that refuses to close. Now think about how this shows up in your life today, stripped of predators and storms, but wearing the exact same psychological clothing. You check your phone repeatedly after sending a message that hasn't been answered. Not because you expect bad news, but because the unanswered state itself is intolerable. You replay a conversation looking for the moment it might have gone wrong, not because you're certain it did, but because you can't stand not knowing whether it did. You feel far more unsettled by a vague warning at work, something might change soon, than by a clear and even difficult piece of news, you're being let go in 2 weeks. The clear bad news gives your brain a pattern to plan around. The vague warning leaves the loop open indefinitely. This is why waiting rooms feel so uniquely unbearable, why the space between sending an important email and receiving a reply can feel disproportionately heavy, why silence from someone you care about can feel worse than an argument. Your nervous system isn't malfunctioning in these moments. It's running an ancient program that once kept your ancestors alive, one that treats unresolved uncertainty as a threat requiring constant vigilance, even when the modern uncertainty in question is something as mundane as whether a coworker is annoyed with you. Here's the twist that should change how you think about your own anxiety. Modern life has, in some ways, made this ancient wiring far more difficult to satisfy than it ever was on the savannah. Your ancestors' uncertainties were almost always resolved eventually and often quickly. The predator either attacked or moved on. The storm either passed or didn't. But modern uncertainty can stretch indefinitely. A message can go unanswered for days. A diagnosis can take weeks to arrive. A relationship can sit in an ambiguous, undefined state for months. Your prediction-hungry brain was built for a world where open loops closed relatively fast. It was never built for a world where they can remain open almost indefinitely, held hostage by someone else's schedule, an algorithm, or a bureaucratic process entirely outside your control. This also explains something curious about human behavior that has puzzled psychologists for years. Why people often feel relief, not devastation, upon receiving bad news after a long period of uncertainty. A cancer diagnosis after months of ambiguous symptoms. A breakup after weeks of mixed signals. A layoff after months of company rumors. The news itself is painful, but the resolution of the uncertainty offers something your ancestors' brains were desperate for all along. A closed loop, a pattern restored, a world that once again makes sense enough to plan around. The bad news, in a strange way your ancestors would completely understand, can feel better than the unresolved question that came before it. So what did ancient humans actually fear most? Not death, which at least arrives with an ending. They feared the unresolved, the unexplained, the pattern that refused to complete itself. Every myth, every ritual, Every explanation for thunder and disease and the movement of the stars was at its core an attempt to close a loop the ancient mind could not bear to leave open. And every time you refresh your phone, replay a conversation, or feel that particular unease of not knowing, you're running the exact same ancient program, still searching for the one thing your ancestors needed more than safety itself. A pattern, any pattern, that finally lets the loop close. Which brings you back to that anxious feeling you started with, the one that wasn't about pain or sadness at all. It was never really about the bad news you were afraid of receiving. It was about the unbearable space before you received anything at all, a space your ancestors filled with gods and rituals and stories, and a space you now fill with refreshing a screen, waiting for the one thing that has always mattered more than certainty itself: an answer.